Hey there, happy Friday. We made it. It's the end of the week. Huzzah! And unless you're like me that has to do reporting tomorrow. My name is Logan Edmonds. I'm CEO of Tabernacle Technology Solutions. I am joined by Tom Wetzel with Wetzel and Associates. Tom, why don't you take 30 seconds here to go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience today?
I'm a long-time consultant to insurance agencies and brokerages and companies with a long-time specialty in digital marketing, specifically cybersecurity and artificial intelligence,
Awesome.
and speak all across the country on a lot of things. And delighted to be with you, Logan, and we work together.
Absolutely. And Tom, you're also a prolific writer as well. I mean, you've done columns in Insurance Journal, you've gone
Rough
around to different
notes, yeah.
shows. Yeah, like Tom, you get around.
I try.
Well, thanks for joining us today, Tom. So, what are we doing, right? Like, that's always the big question. What are we doing here? What are we talking about? Well, the title of today's webinar is Shielding Your Assets Cybersecurity Risk Management for Insurance Leaders. Cybersecurity is kind of a big deal. And I'm not going to talk about it a ton today, but current world events are kind of illustrating even more why we need to pay attention to it. Tensions are high, and it has the side the world of cyber. Someone said to me on our last week's live stream, the world of cyber and the world of physical, like there, I used to say the boundary was blurred. I don't think there really is a boundary anymore, not like a clear delineated one. Like cyber and physical just go hand in hand, and one affects the other dramatically. um, for those of you tuning in today, at any point today, if you'd like to learn, hey, what's the deal about managing cybersecurity risk? Maybe you have specific questions. Maybe you want to chat with an expert and kind of learn more about what you're supposed to do or what our best practices are. We got you covered. In the top left-hand corner of this live stream, you can see a little QR code that says schedule today. That'll take you straight to our calendar page where you can book a free 15-minute call, no strings attached, appointment with somebody. Maybe you want to chat, just have a chat. That's how you do it. Feel free to utilize that anytime. So I'm going to go ahead and share our slide deck here, Tom, and we're going to be down here in the little bottom left-hand corner, right-hand corner. So the statement I kind of want to start today's webinar off with, and it's right here on the slide deck. Technology and innovation, right? They're good things. They revolutionize the way we do stuff, including business, including insurance. They offer unprecedented opportunities for growth, for scale, for efficiency. But like with most opportunities, and I think you'll resonate with this, there are always inherent risks that have to be managed. Would you agree with that statement?
I would completely.
Okay. Okay. So the big question here, and it's a rhetorical one, we're not asking the audience to answer this, but the big question when it comes to cybersecurity risk or any kind of risk, does ignoring a risk make it go away? How would you answer that, Tom?
Absolutely not. Makes it worse, in fact.
Maybe we're asking the wrong audience for that question, but
That's true.
that is always the premise of anytime you start the risk conversation. Does just ignoring it make it go away? And the answer is almost universally no. I think
Agents are risk averse anyway.
it's true. It's true. Risk management, let's talk about that for a second. Now, you've got more background than I do, and specifically on generic risk management. Obviously, my background is cyber risk, cyber risk management, but the way I understand it, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, there are primarily, broadly speaking, right? And we're not going to go too deep on these, but five primary ways of managing risk. You can avoid it, you can transfer it, you can work to reduce it, that's loss prevention, reduction, or you can share it. And then the fifth one is the one nobody really wants, which is you can just retain it. That sound right to you?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that's pretty 101 risk management in my humble opinion for anybody who's watching this webinar. But it definitely these principles definitely apply to cyber risk, and we're going to talk about each and every one of them today. So, what is cybersecurity risk, right? Well, what is this thing we're talking about? Well, let's start with defining it. Cybersecurity risk refers to the potential for unauthorized access, use, disclosure, disruption, modification, or destruction of information in a business. It can also entail financial losses, damage to an organization's reputation, and legal repercussions. It's influenced by a firm's use of technology, the nature of its business operations, the strategies in place to and the strategies in place to safeguard against a range of vulnerabilities and threats. That's a very technical definition, but I think it's pretty all encompassing. What does that look like? Tom, I want you to chime in here because I know you've got even more. But in my mind, three easy ones I think most people have heard about. Phishing attacks. Everyone gets phishing emails nowadays. Tom, have you gotten a phishing email?
Oh, I get them all the time.
I get them daily, right? Like, and that's just the world we live in. Well, why are we getting these things daily? A phishing attack can literally just be someone's trying to get you to click a link to steal your password. That's a cybersecurity risk. Ransomware, we hear all about that one in the news. Oh my gosh. Someone got ransomware this week. Who was it? Shoot. Obviously, there was the whole MGM casino thing last month. There was someone I heard recently that got hit even hard. Ace Hardware, I heard through the grapevine, might have gotten hit over the weekend, allegedly. I need to go find the article. But I thought that was funny. Like hearing Ace Hardware and ransomware in the same sentence. Not really where I thought that was going. And then, of course, outdated software. That's old software that might have security holes that hackers can use to get into your systems. I mean, all three of these things I think would count as cybersecurity risk. But Tom, do you have anything else specifically you'd want?
I would add one more, and that's your agency's own employees, because the number one factor in
I like that.
in risk or that contribute to being hacked is error, employee error. You click on something you shouldn't. You don't recognize it as illegitimate. You click on it, and then the damage has been done. And that's tough in a small agency when you're multitasking. You're trying to do everything all at once. This is a situation where you can't. And I would add, artificial intelligence makes all of these risks that much worse.
We're going to talk about AI in a little bit here because that's a whole rabbit hole by itself. But I like what you said. That I think the fancy word for what you just described is insider threat, which a lot of people, when they think of that, think like maliciousness. But honestly, the majority of insider threat, in my experience, is just accident.
It's inadvertent.
Yeah. Your employees aren't out after to get you, right? Or your team's not out to get you. They just make a mistake. I mean, I'm a cybersecurity professional, and guys, secret here. I've clicked a phishing email before. Like, I've fallen for the fish at some point in my life. I know, shocking. But that's true. Like, I think we all make mistakes, right?
Yeah, and they're becoming harder to spot. That's another element of this.
I'm going to put that. Let's talk about that in the AI section.
I don't want to jump ahead.
No, but that's true. Like, and we're going to talk about that in the AI because generative AI, and particularly, makes phishing emails a lot more realistic. That's what I've been noticing lately. So, for those of you who don't know who this is the FBI IC3 serves as a public resource for organizations to submit reports of cyber attacks and incidents. So this is the public takeaway. Obviously, public data is always a little interesting to parse through because you always wonder what wasn't reported, but we can only work with what we got. So let's look at the data we have available. So I read through this report, and I had three primary takeaways that kind of stood out to me. Number one, business email compromise. Business email compromise is a fancy way of saying someone broke into your email. They figured out the password, they got you to click a phishing link, whatever, they got into your email. What I found that was pretty interesting about that simple action, getting into somebody's email, that was listed as a significant threat in 2022, as the IC3 received over 21,832 complaints, totaling to more than 2.7 billion in adjusted losses. Billion with a B. Breaking into somebody's email can equal 2.7 billion losses in a single year. That's kind of mind-boggling when you think of it without really, just on the surface. B, as you mentioned, Tom, the business email compromises, the phishes, they've become evolved. They're becoming more sophisticated. This is not the Nigerian prince anymore. That's a big takeaway that I'm seeing here. This is realistic. This is intended to get people to click it, and it doesn't matter necessarily how savvy you are. They're figuring out how to get around the humans and sort of the blind spots in our psychology. Ransomware is another threat that cannot be ignored. The IC3 received over 2,385 ransomware complaints in 2022 alone. So that's pretty. And again, I always say this too. Like, take that data. That's the data of the people who are willing to go on file, right? Like, they're willing to let the FBI know that they were ransomware. That's not everybody, right, Tom? Like, we know for a fact a lot of people don't want to talk about this stuff.
And agents are especially sensitive because they are the trusted advisors to their clients, and they want to maintain that.
Absolutely.
And so they're going to be hesitant to, and their clients are going to be hesitant as well to be open.
Yeah.
But
so we're gonna
that's a topic for another day.
No. Let's pause here for a second. If anybody in the chat, and I'm monitoring our LinkedIn chat, I need to go ahead and pull up our Facebook. I think it's going to come through here, and our webinar on the website. If anybody in the chat has a question, let's go ahead and take 30 seconds here, Tom. Pause the slide deck. Let people type. Like we're an open book here.
Absolutely.
Check the webinar. You know, Tom, I don't know if I told you this. I did a webinar 2 weeks ago, so I just got fiber internet. And the reason I got it was 2 weeks ago I tried to do a webinar on my old internet, and I didn't even realize I thought I was streaming. Apparently, I was cutting out every 2 minutes and like freezing up for a solid 45-second block. So, how am I looking today? How's it look?
You look fine.
All right. Okay, I'm not seeing anything coming into the chat on either Facebook, LinkedIn, or our webinar page, so I'm going to keep on trucking. But if you have questions at any point in this webinar, if anybody wants to ask something, we do.
You don't understand something because we're throwing a lot of things at you, and it's sometimes agents can be overwhelmed.
Oh, hey, we got a question. What did we do, Allie? Okay, Allie, that's a fun story. So I'll tell that story. Allie wants to know, what did I do in 24 hours after I clicked on the phishing email? Let's talk about that. So we're a cybersecurity shop, right? You'd think the CEO of a cybersecurity company would never fall for a phishing email. Hate to tell you, I have a specific story to debunk that myth. I had just got the phone with a vendor, and they were supposed to send me an encrypted email full of like confidential data, very secure email that I could review and take a look at. It was a very sensitive report. The moment I get off the call with the vendor, it was a Zoom call, I get an email in my inbox that says encrypted email in the subject line. And of course, I just got off that call. Encrypted email. That's definitely what I want, right? I didn't look at the sender. I didn't look too deep because I expected it. So I clicked on it. And I think it was just a perfect storm, because then it redirected me to a fake page from Microsoft trying to get my credentials, and all of our security tools went nuts. They all start saying, whoa, this is a phishing. This is not right. This is okay. So we did go ahead as a cybersecurity company and do a quick look into it. Obviously had a couple of our engineers take a look, myself. Nothing went further than that click, but I had a little bit of egg on my face because, yeah, I'm a cybersecurity company CEO. They got that far.
You're all vulnerable to it.
Yeah. So, Ali, in my case, it ended up being okay because we had mitigated our risk in multiple layers, and we'll talk about that later. Because at the end of the day, we know we're going to click the fish. It's inevitable. I think someone was telling me, I saw stats recently on a slide deck from somebody presenting on this topic. They said 19.8% of phishing emails are clicked, about 1 in 5. So thank you for asking, Allie, and participating. Appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and pull up our slide deck again, Tom. So let's keep trucking. But if you have any other questions in the chat, please hit us with them. We sometimes we need to stop talking, Tom, to hear ourselves talk, right?
Exactly.
Okay. So a lot of people have a misconception, and I got to be careful on this one. They think because they're in the cloud, their security risk is being managed for them. And that, on the surface, and we can go more granular on that, but that's simply not true as a general rule. 82% of the attacks that we talk about that hit the news, that we're referencing in these articles, they are happening in the cloud, whether it's a public cloud, a private cloud, or a hybrid environment where you have a cloud and on-premise. The cloud is at the end of the day, somebody else's computer. There are certain things that the person who owns the computer will do, and there are certain things that they won't. Great example of this is, I believe the last time I checked 6 months ago, Microsoft's terms and conditions. They specifically say if your username and your password are used in the incident to get access to data that have a breach, they don't have any liability in that. Microsoft protects its systems, it protects its staff, but it doesn't give you any kind of guarantee on that in their terms and conditions. So if you're using Outlook, for example, and your email gets hacked, Microsoft is, for the most part, and again, hashtag, parentheses, not a lawyer. Like, this is not legal advice. This is my take on it. Microsoft has waived its liability in that scenario. It doesn't have to worry about that. That's your problem. So it's worth looking at and saying, okay, where am I putting my most sensitive data and how is it being managed? Now, this is a story, and Tom, I know you've heard this story before, of an actual client that we worked with in a scenario that they went through as a small business. Now, I've changed names, I've changed details. Obviously, I think, yeah, the bustling city of Techville, right? Like, this is not a real place, but the scenario we're depicting did happen, and we're going to talk about that. So, upon a time, in the bustling city of Techville, lived a diligent employee named Sarah. Sarah worked for a small, reputable financial firm. It was known for her meticulous attention to detail. One day, while sipping her morning coffee and going through her emails, she received a message that appeared to be from her boss, Mr. Thompson. This goes back to your story, Tom. We'll talk about this in a second. The email was perfectly crafted, mirroring Mr. Thompson's usual tone and writing style. It read, Sarah, I need you to review this financial report urgently. There seems to be a discrepancy in our accounts. Please check the attached document and get back to me ASAP. The email had an attachment named financial_report.pdf. Sarah, being the diligent employee she was, immediately clicked on the attachment, eager to resolve the issue. However, unbeknownst to her, she had just fallen victim to a sophisticated spear phishing attack powered by generative AI. This is where we're going to talk about AI. The email was not from Mr. Thompson, but from a cyber criminal who had used generative AI to mimic Mr. Thompson's writing style. The AI had been trained on numerous emails and documents to create a convincing forgery. The attachment was not a financial report, but a malicious software that now had, and I should put, full access to Sarah's computer. All right. You mentioned multiple things earlier that tied into the story, Tom. So let's take a second and talk about this. First and foremost, the people aspect. How often are you hearing stories that are similar to the one we just described?
Very often. And it's not just necessarily from an agency employee. It could be from a client who does something that indirectly impacts the agency. I've heard examples of that. And an agent actually was hacked through a client. So it's important for the agency to counsel clients about cybersecurity protocols, in addition to making sure their house is in order as well. And the problem with that is that what worked 5 years ago, I have a strong firewall. Agents tell me this, no longer works as effectively as it did. And you can't rely on one tool. You have to rely on multiples, and you have to upgrade them to match what the cyber criminals are doing.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at the last few years and how AI is disrupting things. I told you we talk about generative AI sooner or later. You can't do a webinar in 2023 without generative AI being a part of it anymore, right? But generative AI is spear phishing, which is where you make an email that looks super realistic and practical to your intended target. So it's targeted at one person. That used to take a lot of time. That used to take a lot of research. That used to be, I need to go and look at this person and really think about the email I'm writing. And it still was dangerous, but it was very difficult, if not impossible, to scale that kind of attack, right? Like that's a time sink. Well, in comes large language models with generative AI, where you can do like that story, give documents, emails, whatever the intended target is, and say, generative AI, write realistic emails, and then just keep it going, right? You can just dump that in and automate it, make it scalable.
And the more you use it, the better it gets over time.
Correct. So now we have to deal with customized attacks written by an AI for an individual small business. That is in not only the realm of possibility, it is happening by all available data right now. People are surprised where this data comes from. Just to give you an idea, recently the 23andMe, the I don't know if you heard about this story, the genetics testing company, they were hacked being in quotations, but it's not what most people think. The company itself wasn't hacked. What had happened is a hacker had gone on the dark web, found all this data that was just floating out there. People's actual passwords were on the dark web. And then they plugged into a robot and said, robot, log into as many accounts as you can on 23andMe. And the robot had access to thousands, I think tens of thousands of accounts just doing that method. So 23andMe didn't do anything wrong in that scenario, as far as I can tell. But those passwords were just sitting there ready to be used. And data like that exists everywhere on the internet, on the dark web. It's very easy if you know where you're looking. So, real problem. Whether you're an organization of 1 or 100, I guess this is the main thrust of what we're trying to get to. You're a target. The criminals have commoditized their own tools and they have learned to scale. Automation is both a benefit and a curse. In this case, it is definitely being turned against people. Um, we're seeing attacks being automated, which means it makes sense to go after a 1 or 2 person agency to your regard, right? Because there's no real work and I can just keep automating emails. I can just keep automating attacks. I can set this thing on autopilot until I get something good and then sit back and watch the robot go. We're seeing that happen a lot with cyber criminals. All right. This is the part, Tom, I want you to talk about cyber insurance. Give me obviously you're not in a just right now you want to do a little thing. I'm not an insurance agent. I'm not licensed to sell insurance. This is me coming as a cybersecurity professional. I believe you're in a similar boat, correct? You're not licensed in any of this regard.
I am not licensed. I never have been, but I've been in the business for decades.
So from your professional expertise of being in the business for the decades, right? How is cyber insurance going right now? Let's talk about that. How's it looking?
Well, number one, and any agent who is selling cyber knows that premiums have gone up and underwriting has become a lot tighter, limits, sublimits, and they are requiring would-be policyholders to demonstrate that they've already taken certain specific cybersecurity steps to limit their risk. Otherwise, some companies won't even issue a quote, let alone a policy. And they're asking far more questions. A few years ago, you could ask 1 or 2 questions, the agent would fill it out, and that would be that. Now it's talking about pages and pages of very specific questions, some of which agents have told me, I don't even know what they're talking about. I don't understand it.
I help with these applications and I don't even know half the time what they're talking about. Like sometimes the language is just vague, even for somebody who knows the technology and the tools. I answer your question. We had a customer that happened to the quote denial. They went to submit the renewal and the carrier came back and said, before we give you a quote, you got to go fix these 3 things that we saw on your application. We scanned your domain on your website and this stuff was not working right? Like that's what they're doing now. They're trying to say, because that application is a warranty in a lot of ways. And we'll talk about that. It is not always, it is a warranty. Long story short, I'd say kind of the big things are, if you aren't selling cyber, maybe you're not familiar with the process, and that's okay. The applications, TLDR, too long, didn't read. They've gotten very long. They've gotten more complex. It used to be a couple pages. I had a policy in 2019, my own personal policy. I believe the application in 2019, 2018 was like 3 pages long. I checked some boxes that were pretty generic, and I got $1 million in coverage. Have a nice day. It's not like that anymore.
And even the simple policies, you have to be aware of that. It may be they may only ask you a few questions, but the coverages are going to be less than adequate.
I can talk about my policy because that's a big one. I obviously have a lot more risk than only policy I'm qualified to talk about is my own, right? Like that's the way I view it, because I'm the one that bought it and worked on it. But my policy, I have a $2 million aggregate as a cybersecurity company. I have to. I work with some pretty big companies. I will tell you right now that policy has a checklist of different attacks and different styles of exclusions where I have a small fraction of my aggregate available in claim payout. And unfortunately, we've had to work with this where this has happened. We had a customer that it was a relatively small policy. I think it was about $500,000. But what ended up happening was that business email compromise hit them and they lost a lot of money. Even though they had $500,000 in supposed insurance coverage, because of how the exclusions were applied inside the policy, they only got a payout of $15,000. Like that is a thing right now that a lot of people are finding out, unfortunately, after the fact. Do you have anything to add to that? Okay. We're going to stop here for just 1 second. that was kind of deep and that was kind of heavy to drop on the audience, especially an audience of people who deal with risk every day. I'm sure we might have some questions in the chat. We're going to take 30 seconds here to allow people to put their questions in the chat. If you have something that you're thinking or you want more clarification on what we just said, we're an open book. Go ahead and put it in the chat, please. Actually need to check. Looks like my window for the Facebook stream froze.
I might say that I'm sure that if people are thinking of questions, but they think after the webinar is over that both of us will answer those questions. And that's frequently what I hear in the presentations and the workshops that I conduct across the country. The agents will think of something later, and that's fine.
That's fine. And that we got a QR code up here. Go ahead and schedule a call with us. You can submit an inquiry on my website. We'll have an opportunity at the very end, or just comment on the stream. If you're coming from LinkedIn or Facebook, if you comment on the stream after it's done, if you're watching the replay, or go to our webinar page, we'll happily answer your questions. I'm double checking here. I think we're good to keep going. I know we're about 20 seconds behind, so let's give it another 15 seconds here, and then we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, we're going to go on to the next portion here. But if you've come up with a question or you want us to circle back, guys, just, again, put it in the chat. So from my perspective as the security professional in this conversation, there's a lot going on here. A lot of stats that are, honestly, if I can be candid, a little depressing. And it kind of illustrates and underscores the problem. Half of the companies that we're talking about here, when they get ransomware, let's start there, ransomware, lose between 11 to 20% of their client base initially. That 20% of your client base, when you're a small business, that is a huge chunk of change, especially which 20%, right? Some clients not all clients are equal. That's another thing I always think about. 92%, or a little over 92%, 92.4% of 10% of attacks are delivered via email. Sometimes people are like, why email? Well, it's because what's the one thing all businesses have? We all have emails. There's no one, no matter how big, how small, well, almost no one, virtually no one, that has a business that doesn't have some kind of email account. On average, it takes somewhere between 120 and 207 days to find out that you've been a victim of a data breach. This is for attacks that might go beyond your initial, I just want to steal money from your bank account, or I want to ransom your stuff. This is stuff like, I'm going to steal your data and I'm going to upload it to the cloud, and I'm going to figure out how I can use the data I stole from you to defraud your customers or your vendors. Like, these kind of scenarios happen all the time. 58% of attack victims are for malware are small businesses. It's officially shifted in the ratio, more small business than not. And 60% of small and medium-sized businesses, this stat's thrown out a lot, but it is sobering, so I included it here, go under within 6 months of a breach. Why? Well, statistically speaking, let's talk. If you can survive long-term on a data breach or a ransomware attack, you'll probably recover okay. No one even talks about Equifax anymore, which lost 1 in 2 American Social Security numbers 5 years ago, right? I'd say the public has a fairly short attention span for this kind of stuff for the most part. There's a few exceptions, but that first 6 months, that is absolutely not the case. You've got diminished customer bases. Customers are afraid to work with you. One of my vendors recently got popped about a year ago, and I stopped working with them. I couldn't have that in my reputation. I had to do it. They didn't handle it right. The customers there's questions you got to answer. Depending on what kind of attack, we're talking about operational loss too. Money's taken from your account, ransomware shuts down your business, or you got to pay somebody. I mean, the list goes on and on. And that can be a lot to ride out when, COVID kind of taught us how many small businesses can operate without, normal cash flow for any length of time. It's not a whole lot of us. Tom, do you look at your
and they may not be. This is relevant to policyholders of agencies and brokerages. They may not bring up specific issues, specific concerns. They may not be talking about data breaches or thinking about it. But so you, as an agent, have to bring it up.
Yeah.
Because believe me, they are thinking about it, even if they're not expressing it.
And the agents know this, but when you file a claim, it's not instantaneous. A lot of policy holders who aren't in the professional, who've never had to file a claim before, don't realize, like, it depends obviously on the kind of claim you're filing. But cyber insurance, statistically speaking, takes an average of 3 to 4 months to pay out. So that's time where if you've lost, like my one customer I told you about I dealt with, it took them 3 months to get their $15,000 because you got to engage a breach coach. You got to engage forensics. They got to do all the due diligence. They got to figure out who did what, how did it happen. That takes time, and the carrier is not going to pay out until they have the full story.
And all of the vendors that an agency uses, they're just as vulnerable to the agency.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I talk about is the fact that there are some very well-known vendors that agencies use, including agency management systems. WordPress has been hacked. LastPass, which is a password manager, they've been hacked.
Yeah.
Dropbox has been hacked. All of these agents must be concerned about the vendors they use and the degree to which they may be vulnerable or more vulnerable because they have fewer defenses.
We're getting some comments here, and I apologize.
Good. They're coming in on your side. I'm not seeing them on mine.
So let's talk about this for a second because we got a couple questions in chat for some reason didn't come up. So I'm going to go ahead and address them now. So first question is from Isaac Koenig back earlier in the presentation, and he asks, "Doesn't Microsoft provide you with backups?" The short answer is not really. In fact, they put it in their terms and conditions. For example, if you're using the cloud, that you're supposed to make your own backup. That is something that when you click I accept those terms and conditions, they have a recommendation there and saying, hey, go back up your data with someone other than us.
Right.
Because the cloud, there's a lot of reasons to use the cloud. And I'm not going to be the one that goes and says, don't use the cloud because I use it. It's scalable. It has a lot of efficiency needs. You've got people who are building the infrastructure. But as far as data, Microsoft takes, for example, just an example, they take no responsibility on the integrity of the data saved in the cloud. So that's on you. If you keep business operational data, if you keep your email, things like that, you really should be making some kind of backup to some kind of other solution on a regular cadence. And then the second question he asked was, how is my business insurance? I'm going to ask you this, Tom. How is my business insurance different than cyber insurance? Let's talk about the difference between E&O, professional liability, and cyber, and kind of the stuff we're going there. Like, how would you answer that question?
Well, cyber is very specific, and it will tell you what it covers and what it doesn't cover, and the exceptions. And that's a moving target. And if you are relying on an endorsement, for example, on a BOP, on a business owner's policy, that's not going to be adequate. 99% of the cases, that may be what the policyholder wants to pay for, and because it's easy. Yeah. But if they are ever hacked, they're going to find that there are services that won't be available to them, and the limits and the conditions are going to be far more restrictive than if they
that kind
get
of makes sense though.
policies.
Like my E&O is way cheaper than my cyber policy. Like if I just pay for E&O and professional liability, like that's so much less on the premium than it is for cyber because the scope is so much narrower. Right? Like in terms of what they're engaging on. Okay. Good question, Isaac. Isaac, if you have any others, please post them in the chat. I apologize. I had the feed open. For some reason, the questions didn't post immediately. It does appear to be working now. I see we have multiple people joining us. We're good there. Please engage here. I'm actually going to go ahead too, Tom. To go ahead. Our Facebook stream is being weird too. So I'm going to go ahead and pull it up, but I think we might have to go backwards on. Okay, there we go. Nope, no questions here. We're good. So let me pull the slide deck back up. And big question you're probably asking at this point if you're watching this webinar. Okay, great. I get it. It's a problem. What am I supposed to do about it? All right, like that's why we're here. Hopefully that's why you're here. What am I supposed to do about it? Well, there's two simple facts that have to be just said out loud before we can talk about what next steps are. One, criminals, hackers are treating this like a job. That's kind of the difference between now and like the 90s, for example, broadly speaking. when I was growing up, there was a big hack the world culture. Tom, did you ever see the movie Hackers?
Yes.
I love that movie. It's one of my favorites of all time. Sunglasses, trench coats, hack the world, right? Like that's amazing. Like no cyber criminal I've ever heard of or know of in the modern era looks like or acts like that.
It's a billion-dollar industry.
It's a guy like us with a collared shirt sitting in a cubicle somewhere most of the time, having a headset on with a whiteboard writing notes down, right? Like that is what the modern cybercriminal looks like. And for the most part, and it's not always the case, but they'll operate from across geological borders. We pick on Russia a lot in the news, and we say a lot of hacking comes from Russia. Well, one of the things that makes Russia unique, allegedly, is criminals basically operate with carte blanche in their country. As long as they don't target Russian interests, the Russian government allegedly protects them. So they can target U.S. businesses all day long with no real risk because Russia doesn't extradite its citizens. And that's true with multiple countries. So if you're smart enough to know, hey, I should be targeting, where Western companies usually are more wealthy in terms of amount of capital they have on hand. And B, there's no legal consequence for me to do it. It's a business. And the third thing, too, for these criminals, unlike most crime, they don't see their victims. Like there's not that emotional connect of seeing who they're harming or who they're wounding. It's just a job to them. So that's the first thing I think that's changed that we need to kind of address, because the other thing is because of that, things have changed. Cyber attacks are way up, and really the only way forward, in my opinion, and hopefully we'll get to be able to persuade our audience, is to be proactive about this issue. I mean, just Google cyber attack insurance and you'll get 4, 5, 6, 7 dozen, 2 dozen articles from the last few months alone. I mean, Progressive got hit back in August. American United Life got hit. The Vermont Department of Financial Regulation got hit. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I used to be like, I'd show these stories like about 4 years ago, and people like, wow, it's happening that much. Nobody's surprised when I show these stories anymore. Like we all know it's happening on a daily basis. So cyber risk checks. We talked about the 5 principles of risk management. Let's kind of go through that list again, Tom. Can we avoid it? That's a question for you. Can we avoid it? No.
You can't avoid it.
That's the one we can be very clear about. No, you cannot avoid this risk. 2, can we share it? That's tricky because we talked about software as a service platforms, really, especially where a lot of our data, for example, we just use them as our extension. They have very specific terms and conditions. Microsoft, we already talked about, doesn't take liability if your credentials, for example, are used to accomplish the breach. That's not their problem. Or if your data on their platform gets compromised, not their problem.
And legally, as an agency, a brokerage is a collector of data. And legally, if you are a collector of data, you are responsible for that data, no matter where that data ends up.
The buck stops with you. It's not on the vendor.
Yes, it does.
Honestly, the Biden administration's launched a 3-year exploratory committee this year to explore that potential, right? Like, can we shift that liability? But we're at least 3, 4, 5 years out from any meaningful change on that. So for the moment, the buck stops with you.
Legal, the consensus, because I've talked to multiple general counsels for brokerages as well, and they're all in agreement that the buck stops with us. Maybe we can shift maybe we can share the liability to some extent, but ultimately the agent or the brokerage is going to be held liable in some degree.
And I can tell you right now, any reputable firm like mine, for example, like this is an industry standard. They don't accept liability in their terms and conditions. Like that's just how the business operates. Their carriers, the carriers won't allow me to do that. Right? You know, one of the questions on my insurance is, do you have contracts with your customers where you waive liability? That is a check mark box on my insurance application. Mm-hmm. Like that is part of this, how this works now. So sharing and except in very specific scenarios, not really. Transfer. This one's probably the most complicated answer. We talked about the insurance, and traditionally when we think about transferring risk, we talk about getting a policy, transferring it to a carrier. Sometimes yes, sometimes no is really the answer I would come to. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, applications are required that they often require the insured to attest they maintain risk mitigation measures. And we talked about the exclusions already. Like there's a lot of question marks, and that kind of makes sense. This problem kind of ballooned out of nowhere about 3 years ago, and as I understand it, carriers look at things in 10 years trends, right? Like they look at 10-year blocks of time. So what are we supposed to do about
But
this?
they are also, and some of our attendees may be familiar with this and talk specifically about it, but carriers are revising their agency contracts
Hmm.
to require adherence to obviously existing regulations, but also to model best practices in cybersecurity. And and that's going to increase over time. And maybe if you're a smaller agent, they'll let it fly a little bit, but
I mean, it makes sense though, because like
it is.
one of the things that we talk about a lot when we talk agency owners, they don't realize is that every state in the union, whether what kind of business you are, has legal requirements about how you disclose data breaches. And there
And
are
there
no
are no
sides.
exemptions to that. There are
There
no
are no sides
exemptions
to
to
them.
that,
A one man
regardless of
shop.
size. Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like so the carrier's looking at that and saying, wait a second, we got to deal with that if you're underwritten properly. So yeah, you got to kind of play ball and help us manage this. Like, that's how I take it.
Carriers, what they're saying anecdotally, they're saying we only feel as secure as our weakest link, and we feel the agents are probably our weakest link because we don't know what they are doing, or more importantly, what they are not doing to protect the data that they collect and then send to us.
And agents, please, if you're watching this is something I would say too. If you sell cyber, uh, and you get people who are looking for the policy that don't know how to answer those applications, don't try to help them along. And specifically for your sake, that is that form, and we can talk about that some other time. But like we have court cases now with Travelers and a couple others where that application has been used to deny claims, and nobody wants to get involved in that scenario.
And even if you're an agent that doesn't sell cyber, and there may be some, I know there are some because we've done assessments for them. You still need to be familiar with it because your policyholders may ask you questions, and at least you know where to refer them.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. You at least be familiar with the broad strokes of the market, right? So, okay, that leaves us practically speaking. We addressed 3 out of the 5, right? We had 5 initially: avoidance, sharing, transferring were 3 of them. That leaves us practically with 2 others that I think that are the options left on the table. We can either retain the risk or reduce the risk. If you're answering, I want to retain the risk. This is probably part of the webinar that you should stop at, because that's where we're going to stop there. Retaining the risk, in my humble opinion, is just not an option here. Like it used to be, honestly, what we were all doing when the risk was lower. Like we'll just retain it, maybe get a policy for it before COVID, and it'll be okay. Well, that risk has just risen exponentially year after year to the point where I would say it's one of the biggest business threateners for a small business, like in terms of existential threat. And obviously, I know I'm biased, but that's where my head goes when I think of that.
And even if an agency has what they consider to be an adequate cyber policy, I can guarantee you don't want to be hit with a hack because there are lots of expenses you're going to incur that aren't covered.
And I mean,
Not
also too, once you make that claim too, trying to get coverage in the future ever again, oh my gosh.
just the loss of productivity, the time it takes to go through the paperwork for a cyber claim. I've had agents tell me, I wouldn't wish a hack on my worst enemy, and they've gone through it and barely survived.
It's emotional. That's what people
Yes.
sometimes don't realize. Like these criminals are extorting you or threatening your livelihood, and it is emotionally draining. As someone who helps people navigate after the hack has happened, like not a single person says to me when it's done, "Hey, that was fun. Let's do it again." They don't not even close. It's whatever can I do to avoid this ever happening again. I am willing to do if it's within my power. That's almost universally the response.
Todd Thorson has a great comment
Okay.
I think if I was an agent, I would be afraid if my clients just check the boxes and get a claim denied, they will be mad at me and cause me reputation damage. Absolutely. Um, if you don't bring up the issue of cyber coverages and offer it to them and they decline and you don't get a written declination in writing,
Yeah.
or if they find that they are underinsured because you didn't give them the right advice, they're going to come back at you with an E&O claim.
Oh
And
yeah.
that's
Yeah.
something I talk a lot about in my workshops. So
I mean, so we don't want to retain this risk, and we got to reduce it. And how do we go about reducing? That's going to be the big question. Well, I'm going to stop here for a second so we can take a few questions and answers before we go in the last 10 minutes of our webinar. But I would say the statement for that is you need to get the data to make the right decisions for your business to reduce the risk. Without a plan, you're just spitballing and hoping stuff works. And that never as a business strategy tends to go well.
and I will use a military term because it speaks directly to the cyber risk assessment that we do for agents, and it's called situational awareness. You need to know what your risks are and what actions you need to take to address them.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. We're going to go ahead and take another 30 seconds here. It's like we're at 47 minutes. So we'll give it another 30 to 40 seconds. Go ahead and push your questions in the chat. We've had a great conversation so far today with a lot of engagement. I'm really happy about that. This is a hot button issue at the moment for sure. Any plans for the weekend?
I'm actually going out to an agent convention on the East Coast.
There you go. I'm in Florida next week, which the last time I went to Florida, it betrayed me. I underestimated how much SPF I needed. So I'm coming this time prepared. Okay, we're going to keep on going, but please, please, please post your questions in the chat. We're going to go ahead and go into how do we get the data to make the right decisions for your business. That's what you're all here to hear about. You have to identify your current risk exposure. How? I recommend, and I think you would as well, a cybersecurity risk assessment tailored to your business. Specifically, for those attending this webinar, the insurance vertical. What are the specific risks that you have? A cybersecurity risk assessment is a professional consulting engagement. It investigates your current security position overall, determines all the factors that in scope that could make your business more susceptible to an attack. It examines how likely staff or employees are to enabling or furthering that attack. We talked about the insider threat option a while ago, Tom. We want to get a sense of how realistic is that threat for your current headcount. It identifies physical or procedural weaknesses in the business. That's the enable attack. That's a lot of vendor issues right there. Like you were talking about vendors, and if you're relying on your vendors as a key part of your procedures to run your business, to write your sell your policies, to provide service to your customers, their weaknesses ultimately in this field become your weaknesses. That's how supply chain risk works. So you want to know about that. And you want to identify the most likely at-risk business assets. You want to know if someone goes after you, what are they going to go for, right? Like knowing what the target is makes it that much easier to defend. And the thing about cybercrime that I think a lot of people watching the webinar will realize is that is a threat it's like a hydra. It can emerge in a bunch of different ways. We obviously talked about ransomware and business email compromise. There's data theft. There's extortion. I mean, there's simple disruption. It sometimes is the end goal. Disruption. I've been seeing a lot in the mid market, for example, where you're providing service to another company. And that service, like we talked about, is critical to them running their business. So they put punitive damages in their contract. If you can't service my business for any length of time, you're like in the vertical sphere, right? You're a partner to the carrier or a partner to the agent, and you can't service my business. You get punitive damages of $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 an hour, right? Like they'll put a number in there. Well, these criminals will find that contract and say, "Oh, cool. We know if we can shut down your business, just disrupt you, how much it's going to cost you an hour." That's an extortion leverage now that we can lean on. I was listening to a guy who runs a actual like SOC security service that sells tools to people like me, and he was telling me about that yesterday. It is a real thing.
And not all cybersecurity assessments are the same.
Oh, absolutely not.
And
Absolutely not.
this is the plug that we have. Uh, the New York Insurance Department, their Department of Financial Services, has actually a definition of what is included in a comprehensive cybersecurity assessment.
Absolutely.
Ours is totally compliant with that.
NYD, yeah, NY. Same thing with the NYDFS too. That's a
Right.
big one there too. This is what ours looks like. So, for example, Tom. So we've got our process right here in nice little graphical format, and we're happy to send it to anybody who puts it in the chat. This is what if you went through me and Tom to do the assessment, it would look like this. First, you get the executive sponsor meeting. We sit down with you, the primary stakeholder or a stakeholder of the business, whether that you're a leader, COO, CEO, CFO, owner, agent, doesn't matter. We get to know you as an individual business in that meeting. We look at whatever security policy, documentation, compliance, whatever you have currently. And we take that into consideration, again, getting to know you. If you have a physical environment that has concerns, this doesn't come up too much anymore. It used to be a lot more people had servers and whatnot running in their environment. We're going to take a look at that for the most part. Make sure there's nothing, obviously wrong in the environment that could lead to a hack. That tends to be more applicable, though, on the bigger market, but still totally valid. Network review. Network's interesting because a lot of people, when they think network, thinks, oh, my router or my Wi-Fi. That's part of it, but the modern view of a network is the cloud, too. You use SaaS applications, software as a service, to save all kinds of stuff. Microsoft 365 has your email, or Gmail has your email. Adobe has your documents for signature or DocuSign. You might have what is it called? Like Easy Links. What's that kind of software called, Tom?
That's a Raider.
That's a Raider. Thank you. Like a Raider might be containing information that you have. They're all in the cloud. They are part of your network. So we're going to review that perimeter, is what we call it. The actual data that you're putting in that perimeter is also going to get reviewed. You want to know how sensitive it is, if there's stuff you need to know about. A common thing we find a lot of in these kind of assessments is personally identifiable information, or PII. Why do we look for PII? Because every state in the United States has laws saying if you lose PII, you have to tell the person you lost it for. And a lot of times you have to go public with it, depending on how bad it is. You want to know what you have so that you can hopefully reduce it, but more importantly, manage it properly. Intellectual property, there's something special about you. For those of you guys who are in the development space or the vendor space that is your crown jewel, which makes your business unique. We want to get to know it, make sure it's being properly protected. We want to look at users, systems, computers you're running, patch. Do they have any vulnerabilities that are outstanding that need to be taken care of? Great example of this about 3 weeks ago. Huge, what they call a maximum day vulnerability, Tom. A maximum day vulnerability was released. What was the software that was impacted? Zoom and Google Chrome. Guess what's on almost everybody's computer? Zoom and Google Chrome. I spent about a week updating 1,000 computers with my staff. It was fun. And then last but not least, a team behavior test. We want to see how your team is reacting. We want to see how your team is dealing with things. Are they more likely to save passwords somewhere they shouldn't? Might they click a phishing email? These are all things we're going to look for, or more likely to click a phishing email, I should say. Not will they click a phishing email. Are they more likely to click a phishing email? These are all things that we'll look at. At the very end of this, Tom, and you and I have been on many of these calls, we sit down with you. We talk about the review in a way that you as a stakeholder can understand. It is not a technical jargon report, right, Tom?
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
The assessment that we do specifically for agencies is something that you can understand. We may use technical terms, but we're going to explain them in detail in English.
In English, but actions that you can use from this.
Correct.
Right? Like you should be learning from this assessment, saying, I can do things. I understand the problem, and I can talk next steps or plan next steps as the stakeholder. You can take that power back for you. There's, of course, go ahead.
And then there's one additional benefit for those of you that are selling cyber coverages. Yes. The assessment that we do, because it's tailored to agencies, will enable you to sell cyber more effectively, precisely because you'll be able to explain it in more detail in English. Absolutely. Agents have told me that. We didn't design it necessarily to do that, but they told us, hey, this is helping me. I sound like an expert.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, yeah, that's that. I get it. Like you understand the problem, you much better can sell the risk management for it. I mean, that's kind of a no brainer. There is a report. Always get a report. What we've actually found mostly, while the report's useful for like retrospection, most people will get more out of the presentation. I think we've seen that. Like most people get more action out of the presentation than the actual
there's a
report.
lot of detail in the report.
The report
It's
will let you
very
try it.
valuable, but it can be overwhelming
Yeah.
without the benefit of here are the highlights. Here are the
Yeah.
things that you really need to concentrate on now.
But from the regulatory side or the compliance side or the insurance side, it is a box that a lot of times they make you check. Have you had a risk assessment? You've got one now on file, ready to go. And then
Right.
last but not least, we don't just say, here's your problem, have a nice day, for us at least. We say, okay, we'll give you a consultation. What do you think needs to happen based on these results? Give you our expert insights, help you make that plan for next steps so that you can take that power back.
We will also, as clients, you will also receive from me cyber reports from time to time, things that you can share with your clients. We get reports. Logan gets reports, from the FBI, from CISA, almost every day. So
Actually, I met the director of CISA back in August. She's a very lovely lady.
yes,
She very Jen is fun. I got a chance to talk to her at DEF CON. Okay, so here's the rub, right? If you want to go forward, if you think the assessment's something for you, it's very easy. Go ahead and pick a time on the calendar and the QR code above. You can also go to our URL, cyber.tabernacle.tech/cyber strategy session. You can see why we picked the QR code, right? A little easier that way. But you can schedule a free 15-minute consultation to learn more about the cyber risk assessment, what it entails, why it would affect you. Maybe you have specific questions about how it relates to your specific business. That's totally fine. We understand there's only so much we can communicate on a webinar. Maybe though, and if you're ready to make that step, please go ahead and schedule now. But maybe you're not ready yet. Maybe this is, you got to take some time and think about it. Oh, thanks. My wife is in the chat and she just posted the link. Thanks, babe. But maybe you're not ready for that yet. I understand, right? Like, and one thing I think Tom and I have both agreed on, nobody likes a pushy salesperson, right? Like there's a reason used car lots have the reputation they do. And we're not that. So what we've done instead, because we want to give and we want to help people walk away from these webinars, no matter what, with something to help protect themselves. We've actually done a free, if you want to do this, ebook for you to build your own cyber risk program. You can go to the QR code here. There's no strings attached. And download that right now, right here. It's a book, PDF format, goes through everything beginning to end. Take a look if that's the way you want to go. If you're a DIY kind of person, business leader, and you want to go that route, power to you. We're enabling it. Go ahead and scan the QR code.
Just get it done. Make sure that you're
as
protected as you need to be today.
All right. Well, hey, Tom, thank you so much for joining as always. Tom is a regular guest on our webinars, and his insight is awesome. As somebody who lives and breathes in the insurance space for what you said, 30 years, right? You're going 30 years at this point.
Yeah, actually, it's more than that, but I don't.
My wife will get mad.
I don't go there.
No, I'll go there. But someone who's been in this space for a long time, if there's one thing that the agents or the brokerages or the insurance leaders need to take away from this webinar today, what is it?
Take action.
Take action. I love it.
Take cybersecurity seriously, because it's going to hit you sooner rather than later.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for attending. I hope you all have a great weekend. My name is Logan Evans. Once more, I'm CEO of Tabernacle Technology Solutions. Tom, go ahead one more time.
It's Thomas H. Wetzel and Associates. You can find me at www.wetzelandassociates.com. And the Wetzel is AND rather than ampersand. And you can look at all the services we provide specifically to agents.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. Have a great weekend.